Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, where we provide tailor-made solutions for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies, and where we also provide tailor-made solutions for hospitals and intensive care units, whilst providing quality services for long-term ventilated adults and children and medically complex adults and children at home. In last week's blog, I talked about my mum has been in intensive care for 8 weeks on a ventilator with a tracheostomy. Can she go home? You can check out last week's blog by clicking on the link below this video. In today's blog post, I want to share an article published on December the 5th, 2021 from The Guardian. And this is about a terminally ill NDIS insurance patient participant facing re-ICU admission and hospitalization after funding cut for 24-hour ICU nurse. This is actually one of our clients, and I want to read out his story. Ian Haywood's partner is blunt when asked to sum up the couple's latest battles with the National Disability Insurance Agency. They don't think it's quote-unquote reasonable and necessary for Ian to have nursing funding with an intensive care nurse, Bianca told Guardian Australia, referring to the key legal test for NDIS funding. We think it is reasonable for him to stay home, and it is necessary in order for him to live. It's cheaper for the NDIS if he dies. Ian Haywood, 43, lives with a terminal illness, motor neuron disease, and is the latest NDIS participant to speak out about what the Federal Labor Party and disability advocates claim are stealth cuts being seen around the country. Communicating with Guardian Australia via email as he is non-verbal, Ian Haywood said the NDIS has been funding 24-hour intensive care nurse care that allowed him to live at his home on the Mornington Peninsula rather than remaining in hospital. More importantly, rather than remaining in ICU, because a ventilated patient would automatically go back into intensive care, and an intensive care bed is the most expensive bed in a hospital. We're talking about $5,000 to $6,000 per bed day. We here at Intensive Care at Home, we cut the cost of an intensive care bed by around 50%. Ian Haywood said he needed 24-hour care from a trained ICU nurse because he cannot breathe for himself. He is mechanically ventilated via tracheostomy and needs urgent help if something goes wrong. Usually it's something simple like a leaking valve. A nurse with ICU experience can identify the problem and resolve it easily, Haywood said. But without an intensive care nurse, I would be long dead of asphyxia before the ambulance arrived. The funding was initially provided by the NDIS agency after he won an internal review of an earlier decision last year, Haywood said. Now the NDIS has said it will no longer fund the same level of support. My particular concern is that I have a quote-unquote deadline of around mid-January when the nursing funding runs out, at which point, in the worst case, I would have to go to ICU and wait for it to be resolved, Ian Haywood said. During question time in Parliament last week, the government was asked about several cases where participants and their families have been forced to appeal large cuts to NDIS plans. Disability advocate organisations have also told Guardian Australia they are being swamped with requests from participants to help to appeal against the NDIS decision and decisions. It just seems so pointless to have relitigate the same issue, 24-hour intensive care nursing, when the need has previously been established and proven, Ian Haywood said. Bianca said she had experienced nightmares during the last process. I'd be like dreaming that he died, she said. Ian Haywood was diagnosed with motor neuron disease 5 years ago this week. Until then, he'd worked as a child and adolescent psychiatrist. Now I can't move very much at all, Haywood said. I can wiggle my wrists, I can turn my head slightly, and I can blink and move my eyes. Some additional movements are still present, but not under my voluntary control. For example, I will smile if I told a joke. Still, Ian Haywood said there was plenty he could do. He uses a button under his left wrist that allows him to operate a computer, to use the internet, watch movies and read books. Last week, Ian Haywood took part in a kitchen table Zoom meeting with the Voices of Mornington Peninsula political group. He prepared his contribution and shared it with the group when it was his turn. People might look from the outside and just write him off, but he actually feels like he has a reasonable quality of life at the moment, Bianca said. A large part of that is the nursing staff looking after him really, really well. After he was hospitalized in 2019 with pneumonia, Ian Haywood made the tough decision to be intubated and ventilated. He said he did it so he could spend more time at home with his family. They had briefly trialled aged care nurses caring for Ian Haywood, but that was a disaster due to the technical expertise and specialist expertise that is required in his case with mechanical ventilation and tracheostomy. In many cases, the workers themselves did not want to continue at the home due to the complicated nature of the role and the high risk of Ian's nursing care involved. Since then, they have found a provider with ICU-trained nurses, and Bianca says the care has been excellent. This is what the nurses are skilled at. This is their job, Bianca said. This is what we've been trying to explain to the NDIA. There can be a problem any day or night, you never know when there's going to be a problem. An NDIA spokesperson said the NDIS continues to provide a significant level of funding for Mr. Haywood, that is disability-related supports, including 24/7 support. In some cases, such as this, where a participant requires nursing supports that can be delivered by a disability support worker, and transition will occur for a nurse to work closely with a disability support worker to implement a care plan and provide appropriate training to support the participant safely, the spokesperson said. Ian Haywood and his partner Bianca insist the current arrangement is the only one that is safe. They had not heard anything about a so-called transition until the NDIA's statement to Guardian Australia. And I could just add here on my own volition that we, as a specialist intensive home care nursing service, we find it outrageous that a support worker supposedly could be trained by an intensive care nurse if even a general registered nurse is not allowed to look after ventilation and tracheostomy. It's outrageous. It's like flying the airplane with the cabin crew instead of the pilot. No amount of training of the cabin crew will get them to fly the airplane. It's the same here. No amount of training of a support worker can get them to look after ventilation and tracheostomy, because it takes years of intensive care experience and obviously a nursing degree and also a postgraduate nursing degree in critical care. So the article in The Guardian continues, if the funding is not reinstated, Ian Haywood will probably be forced to go back to ICU. The other option is a group home for people who are ventilated in Thornbury, more than an hour's drive from where the family currently lives. So maybe Ian would end up there rather than in his own family home, Bianca said. It's just ridiculous. With Ian Haywood at home, he can still spend plenty of time with his 8-year-old son. Ian has introduced him to Doctor Who, Bianca said. They'll play chess together, they'll do other stuff together. They've got their other YouTube videos they watch together. We'll play other board games and stuff like that together. Bianca said the family was just exasperated to be going through their second appeal process in 2 years. Will we have to do this next year again, she said. And mentioning that Bianca's name has changed for privacy reasons. You should also check out the original article on The Guardian. I put a link below this video and also the images. Now, if you have a loved one in intensive care and you want to go home with our service intensive care at home, and if you want to find out how to get funding for our service and how it all works, please contact us on one of the numbers on the top of our website, or simply send me an email to info@intensivecareathome.com. Please also have a look at our case studies, because there we highlight more about what we can do for clients, how clients can live at home with ventilation and tracheostomies, and you can look at our case studies as well. And if you are at home already and you need support for your critically ill loved one at home, and you have insufficient support or insufficient funding, please contact us as well. We can help you with all of that. And if you are an intensive care nurse or a pediatric intensive care nurse with a minimum of 2 years ICU or pediatric ICU experience, and you ideally have a critical care certificate, please contact us as well. We are currently hiring ICU and PICU nurses for clients in the Melbourne metropolitan area, northern suburbs, Mornington Peninsula, Frankston area, South Gippsland, Warrigal, Trafalgar, Druin, Moe, Tryda, Patterson Lakes, as well as in Wollongong in New South Wales, and as well as in Brisbane. So, we are also an NDIS, TAC and DVA approved community service provider in Australia. Have a look at our full range of service provisions. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you for tuning into this week's blog. This is Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, and I shall talk to you in a few days. Take care.